Hey, soul sister, welcome to another episode of Midlife Love Out Loud. Woo! I have an interesting episode today, very different than we typically have, because we're going to talk about a topic that we tend not to talk about: depression and our brain health and how to heal in that realm. And I'm not going to go into it deeply because I got someone who knows a shit ton more than I do. I have Dr. Theodore Henderson in the house. Hi, Ted.
Good to be here.
I get to call him Ted because Ted and I have been friends for, like 13, 14, 15 years. We met a long time ago and have maintained our friendship through the years. We bonded on a cruise ship to Alaska talking about psychology and life, and we just became friends. So I'm just so thrilled to have an opportunity to share your wisdom here. Thank you so much for carving out some time for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let me tell you about my sweet friend, Dr. Henderson. He is the president and co-founder of Neuro-Luminance Inc, which is bringing revolutionary treatments to bear upon traumatic brain injury, depression, Alzheimer's disease, post-COVID fatigue syndrome, thank God somebody's doing that, and other brain disorders. He holds 4 patents. This guy is smart and has 1 patent pending. He's a psychiatrist by training. He has brought physics, immunology, virology, and a deep caring for his patients to bear upon numerous poorly treated disorders. Yes. That's one of the main reasons I have you here, because you really are doing groundbreaking work. And he also has a newly published book that shakes up how we think about depression and its treatment. Dr. Henderson shows the true biological causes of depression, not chemical imbalances, but degenerative changes in circuits. He shows how revolutionary treatments, new treatments, change depression, literally activating the brain's own ability to heal. Cutting edge, cool, heart, wisdom. So excited to dive in. Yay. All right. Well, let's just start with, we want to understand the brain, how it works, and how you can help us change maybe depression and some of these other things. And my first question right now for you truly is, how did you end up on this path with these topics? Because not everyone says, I'm going to put a stake in the ground and help people with new ways of treating and healing depression, Alzheimer's, and all the things that we mentioned.
I mean, and it's a diverse array of disorders. It's not one disorder, but I started out. I'm an MD and a PhD, so I started out in bench research. I was working on how the brain developed, how the brain organizes itself, and what are the factors that are involved. And this was right at the time that we were discovering these growth factors. So I was really on the cutting edge of some of that work. And as I went into psychiatry and went into clinical work, it was this daily frustration of, well, we've got these antidepressants. They work about 17% of the time. Let's try another one. And it was, shooting darts in the dark. That led me into functional neuroimaging, because functional neuroimaging allows us to actually look at the brain and see what's working and what's not. And doing that work and reading thousands upon thousands of brain scans, I kept being in the situation where I'm saying to a patient, well, the scan shows that you've got a traumatic brain injury. Have a nice life. Got nothing to offer you. There's no treatment. That's very frustrating.
I can only imagine.
And so we started digging at that question of what is there that we can bring to bear on this? And this is how the whole work with infrared light got brought in. And you're going to learn more about infrared light today than you probably ever thought you would. And that work is being done at Harvard and University of Texas Southwestern, Uniformed Services Hospital, and Mayo, and all over. Big universities looking at this problem, but they're all looking at it in mice. And so what my colleague and I set out to do was grow it up so it would work in humans.
Wow.
And so we went into the research lab and literally did that work, and then started to treat patients. And what blew us away was, we were hoping for a little bit of improvement, but we were seeing, veterans who had had 4, 5, 6 brain injuries from, roadside concussive events, women who had been in motor vehicle accidents and their entire lives had been changed because of that concussive brain injury. They were getting not a little bit better, they were getting a lot better.
Wow.
And not just, with memory or their ability to think clearly, but their moods were better, their anxiety went away. And so we started saying, okay, let's start broadening the horizon a little bit. And the field is moving forward. So the idea of healing the brain is now actually a concept that we can talk about and not be, talking science fiction.
And a lot of us do like to talk science fiction. Oh my God. And I think that's what it takes. For some people anyway, we get to this place of, this is not okay. This is not acceptable. It's same for me with my work with self-love. It's like, all the pain and torture and challenge that women go through and think, well, this is what we have to just accept about body image, body shame, or feeling not good enough or anything like that. It's like, well, no, we don't have to just have the story end there. And that's when I found my shadow work and the work that I do to help people shift the inner landscape, so people can actually be like, I can actually feel better. I could be different. So testament to both of us going, no, not acceptable. We could do something different. So, and I know you've done such cutting edge work. I'm curious if you can take us a little on the journey of how to really understand how we can help depression, help us understand the brain better.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start by saying something a little shocking.
Okay.
Serotonin has nothing to do with depression. We've been told all this time for years and years and years, oh, you just need to raise your serotonin levels and your mood will be better. The science proves that that's nonsense. It's gobbledygook. This is why SSRIs only work 17% of the time. Prozac, you take Prozac, within hours, your serotonin levels pop up. That's why it's sold as Serafem to treat premenstrual dysphoric disorder. By the way, PMDD, it's a real thing. And this is a guy saying this. And I know because we literally did brain scans on women mid-cycle, beautiful, healthy brains. And then right before their menstrual period, the brains look like they've been chewed on by rats. Oof. And that's because when the progesterone goes down, serotonin goes down and cortical function shuts down. So I'm convinced.
Wow.
But Prozac increases serotonin levels within hours. But it takes 6-8 weeks for it to work on depression. How does that make any sense? And that paradox has been glaring in psychiatry for decades, and no one's calling it out. Well, the top level people are calling it out. And so what makes the most sense and has been shown in neuroimaging studies is what happens in depression is degeneration, breakdown. Synapses get lost, the connections between two neurons break down. The dendrites, which are the tree-like things on neurons, they start out big, like a big oak tree, and with depression progressing, they look like a pruned rose bush in the wintertime. Like die back. Circuits break down, neurons actually die, and areas of the brain get smaller. The hippocampus, part of the brain that's involved in learning, memory, and emotion, it gets smaller in depression. It gets smaller in PTSD. And so these are degenerative changes. Now, fortunately, they're reversible if you can get something in there that's powerful enough to reverse it. Prozac and some of the other antidepressants turn on the reversing of that a little bit. The chemical that does it the most powerfully, that known to man, is ketamine.
Here we go. Yeah.
It exploded on the scene here a decade ago. It's an anesthetic. It's been around since the Vietnam War. But what it does in terms of turning on neuroplasticity, that is brain repair, is huge. What it actually does is activate a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. And BDNF is the protein that stimulates neuroplasticity in the adult brain. It's what I did my postdoctoral research on, in fact. And so I knew about the power of BDNF. And so when ketamine first came on the scene, I'm kind of looking at it as a psychiatrist saying, okay, is this something that might work for my treatment-resistant patients, the patients who have depression, that none of these meds work, ECT doesn't work, TMS doesn't work, would ketamine work? And so I studied the molecular biology of how ketamine works, because I'm a scientist and I'm a geek, and that's what we do.
And that's why you're great. I love it. What a great combo.
And I realized something. The way that ketamine is delivered by most clinics, you go and get 6 infusions over 2 weeks. It's wrong. It's the wrong way to do it. Because ketamine turns on BDNF, and BDNF starts neuroplasticity, and that takes a few weeks to unfold. I mean, an axon only grows 1 millimeter a day. So you're not,
Takes time.
Neuroplasticity
Yeah.
in 3 days. It takes time. So in fact, in our clinic, we never do a ketamine infusion more than once a week. So our
So does that
patients
mean you're spreading out the treatments?
out the treatments.
Because it takes time for the healing. And I would assume that if somebody's had, the prune bush compared to, the
goat
full
tree.
tree, that it might take even longer time. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. So what we're actually finding is that we have patients, they get 3-4 treatments and they're done. Their depression's gone. Whether, I'll give you one example. A middle-aged woman lost her husband, love of her life, and just, was not, it was beyond mourning. This had gone on for a couple of years now. She's just like going to work, coming home, crawling into bed, watching Netflix. That was her life. And she tried medicine after medicine. She came into the clinic. She got 1 infusion. It's like, okay, I don't really feel any better, doc. Yeah, okay, let's give it a couple of weeks. Had her back in, 2nd infusion. I call her up a couple of days later, and she says, God, it's amazing, doc. I feel so much better. I'm doing things. I packed up all my husband's things. I haven't been able to do that. And then she came in for a 3rd infusion. She brought the picture of her husband. And this is where that little bit of dissociative effect that ketamine has can be a wonderful thing. She sat there with that picture and said goodbye.
Oh, I got goosebumps.
And so, 6 months later, I give her a call to touch base, check in on her. She's doing great. She went on a cruise. And, she's meeting people, nothing serious, but she's back in the scene. She's back living life. She's back embracing life.
So a few things there. One is I'm hearing it doesn't have to take long for some people. It can go faster with some people. And what I'm also hearing is it lasts. That once there is that shift, like for this woman, it actually was sustainable. Do people backslide?
Yeah, we're not changing the genes. So if you've got that genetic predisposition for depression, then it is going to stick around and can recur. But I have a patient who she's 6.5 years out from treatment, and she got 6 treatments and has been, feeling joyful. And she said, in fact, her OCD went away too. And so it can last. And it varies from person to person.
And life happens and things happen and we're all wired so differently. I actually want to take a step back and talk about depression for a second, because we all have our moments, right? The women that are listening to this, they might be like, yeah, I'm feeling depressed lately. I feel a little hopeless. Men suck. I'm not meeting anybody. And I'm just finding myself unmotivated. And then there are people that are like, I can't get out of bed, or I'm just, eating lots of food and I'm just numbing out. I mean, there's this big spectrum of happiness and unhappiness. And I'm just wondering, for someone who's listening going, can this help me? Like there's a part, like, I'll just like raise my hand right now. I'm like, sign me up. It's like, I don't consider myself a depressed person. However, I still am challenged with moments, hours, and even sometimes days of lack of motivation or just lack of inspiration. And there's a part of me, it's like, well, I still have trauma that I'm healing. I still have things in my life that I'm like, but is that depression? And does it matter if it's labeled? Maybe throw the ball there to you with
Wow. So, I'm because of my background in neuroimaging, I look at depression differently. In fact, my colleagues and I have published on this several times, basically calling out the nonsense that is the diagnosis of depression.
Right.
Because there are so many variables. I mean, you can be, sleeping all the time or not sleeping at all. You can be eating all the time or not eating at all. You can be, running around frenetically, or you could be on the couch.
Right.
And the same diagnosis of depression. I mean, that's nonsense. So it's missing something really important. And when you look at depression with a neuroimaging, you see different things. You see the frontal cortex shut down, or the frontal cortex can be overactive. You don't treat those two things the same way. The other piece of this is to recognize that we can be sad and we can be forlorn and not be depressed. We can have the emotional experience of men suck, and I agree with that statement. And
good thing you're married and on that team.
I'm married by the grace of God and the wonderful patience of my wife. But being down and being forlorn does not necessarily lead to that degenerative change that we see in depression.
Mm-hmm.
And so recognizing the differences between those two is an important thing that right now, I don't think medical science can really do very well.
Mm-hmm.
I think hearts can do that. But I don't think medical science can recognize the difference.
Got it. And so just going back to that, using myself as an example, I don't consider myself a depressed person or deal with depression. And I would think that there are other women listening going, yeah, however, I do have some trauma. You've mentioned PTSD. And then people are dealing with chronic stress all the time. That is affecting us. Can you connect the dots when it comes to ketamine with supporting women that may not necessarily be depressed, but have maybe some other things? Maybe they're not getting the brain scan. Maybe they're just noticing that they're not where they want to be. And they still have some of these things that bubble up from the past that knocks them off their game. Is that something that you would recommend as a treatment?
Well, I'm going to expand that just a little bit. One of the animal model for depression is chronic stress. How do you know that a rat's depressed, right?
Yeah.
You can't. You just had to create chronic stress. So chronic stress can lead to the same sort of degenerative things that go on in true depression. Just from an animal model perspective, you'd think if you do the same thing to a human, they're going to experience the same sort of loss of dendrites and synapses and such. The thing that's in, so I'm going to tie this now together with the infrared light work, and I'll explain the infrared light in a little bit. But
yeah,
what we're finding with the infrared light is a very interesting phenomenon. We started out treating traumatic brain injury, and then we got into depression and PTSD and et cetera. And what we found is that our athletes who we treated for concussion can have concussive events and they don't get a concussion. Resilience. And I have a patient who had horrible depression, and we treated her with infrared light. She got better. And then all of a sudden her mom died completely unexpectedly. And, she commented to me about 3 months later. She said, I really expected to fall back into the dark hole. And I didn't.
And this was with infrared?
Yeah, this is with the infrared light. So the idea of that we might able to actually not only help heal, but build in some resilience.
Wow. To be able to not fall back down the rabbit hole when you get hit, when you get gut punched. Interesting. Wow, there's so much here. So this is just amazing to me. So you've mentioned infrared. I definitely want to jump into that in a moment because there's lots of different versions of infrared. I've experienced infrared treatments in lots of different ways. However, we did start with talking with ketamine. And I know it doesn't work for everybody. You know, you've mentioned that it doesn't work for some people. And I'm just wondering, who are those people? I mean, we're all unique, we're all different, and yet we're all human beings. So what's going on for them that they're not having the same results as maybe some other people?
That is the question that kept me up at night.
Ah,
I would just get like a dog with a bone with those patients that did not respond to ketamine, because why wouldn't they? I mean, from a fundamental standpoint of what it's doing, of turning on neuroplasticity, they should respond. So it basically splits out into three subtypes of what I found in my patients who didn't respond to ketamine. The first are folks that they've got some genetic hiccup. And we don't know enough about the genetics of depression to nail that down. But they're the ones that say, okay, come on into the clinic. I will run through my master psychopharmacology protocols. I will find something that works for you. And sometimes that takes a few weeks, and sometimes that takes a couple of years. The second are people who actually have a brain injury. And you wouldn't expect an injured brain to respond to an antidepressant the way an uninjured brain does.
right. Got it.
And in fact, brain injury increases the likelihood of being depressed in the next year 5 times, 5-fold. So it's a huge precursor to depression. And the third category, are you sitting down?
Everybody sit down, pull over if you're driving.
Are people who have a brain infection.
Oh, okay, great. Yes, I'm glad you're bringing this up.
So, and I kind of got into this work, again, from the neuroimaging side, of seeing people whose brains look like, like they were infected or, exposed to toxins or something, or they'd been, doing heroin for 12 years and, no toxins, no drug use, nothing, except their brain looked bad. So I started digging into that and came to understand that there's a relationship between things like chronic fatigue and depression. And chronic fatigue is, in most cases, caused by viral infections in the brain. And we've made huge progress over the past 25, 30 years on chronic fatigue syndrome. And it's actually been pushed forward by COVID, because now we have all these people with post-COVID fatigue, and all of a sudden medical science is saying, oh, we need to do something about these folks. So chronic fatigue, which was long neglected and much maligned, is now coming into center stage a little bit. So infection, genetics, and
Undiagnosed brain injuries, all of those things. And these are things that people may not know. And then they think ketamine, and they're like, why didn't it work for me? Wow. This is the stuff that frustrates me. I gotta be honest. It's like, oh, if you just could just put me under a microscope in one shot and go, okay, here's the thing. And it's this journey. It's a journey of discovering. However, for all of you that are listening, like every journey, it takes one step. It takes one step and saying something is not working. I'm not feeling the way I want to feel. I'm not thinking the way I want to think. What might I do? So let's just remember it is a journey, and it can be frustrating sometimes, but let's just know that there are people like this wonderful doctor here that's doing this cutting edge work. Okay. So there are other modalities you've mentioned for healing. So if ketamine doesn't work, infrared you've mentioned. Tell us more about infrared, because like I said, there's lots of different ways people use it.
So infrared light is light that's longer than visible light, running towards radio waves and microwaves. And it's a huge spectrum. But there are very narrow bands of wavelengths that activate the mitochondria within cells.
Yep.
Now, neurons are packed with mitochondria because they're very active. I mean, they literally, they run on electricity, right? So they burn a lot of energy. And the mitochondria have their own set of genes. If you want to, like, figure out if you're related to Genghis Khan, you do that by looking at mitochondrial DNA, because that was what was passed on by the male. And so these mitochondrial genes mostly code for signal proteins. And when the mitochondria are activated by certain wavelengths of infrared light, it turns on these signal proteins that then go to the DNA and say, hey, make stuff like BDNF, which we were just talking about, this growth factor that drives neuroplasticity. But it also makes factors that decrease inflammation, both in the brain or elsewhere in the body. And so that work was largely confined to, looking at mice and rabbits and such. And what we did is grow it up so that we had enough power to get through the scalp and the skull, mine being thicker than most, to reach the brain directly and to be able to directly modulate neuroplasticity in the brain.
Wow. Okay. So again, infrared. I get it. I get the concept. There's different ways of using infrared. I mean, I have a friend that has an infrared sauna, and I will go sit in this infrared sauna, for a half hour, sweat my ass off at 130 degrees. And then there are people that are wearing helmets, advertisements for helmets and pads that are supposed to deliver infrared. Can you help us know more about what are the best ways to use this tool, and how do you know if it's working with infrared?
So infrared saunas are longer wavelengths of infrared. They're not affecting the mitochondria.
Okay.
They do activate anti-inflammatory proteins in the body, mostly because of the heat. It's just like crawling into a sauna in many ways. The helmets and the pads, they drive me crazy. I'll tell you.
There's a lot of shit out there, man. You got it. It's like people like you. We need you to be able to kind of go, this is better than this, and if you can do this, and
All right. So I'll tell you two things that tell why these things are a bunch of hooey. Number one, you know what the best blocker of infrared light is? Hair. So you stick a helmet on top of your hairy head. Some folks are bald, and there it might work. What you're doing is, blocking. It's being blocked. The second is that these helmets and these pads and whatever things you shove up your nose, they're a half-watt LED. The research has shown, not just my research, but other people's research has shown that a half-watt of infrared light doesn't even go a full millimeter through the skin. It's blocked by the skin.
Waste of time.
So, waste of time. But here's the curious thing. Gosh darn it. The studies using these devices show a clinical benefit. Okay. What the heck is that? So this is what's called indirect photobiomodulation. And I just completed a study where I demonstrated this is really happening. So there's a lab down in Texas that has been doing studies using 1064 nanometer light. Why do I say that? Just because, so you have a reference. And they stick this little emitter on the forehead of a person while they're measuring EEG activity. And they show that alpha activity goes up, alpha wave activity in the frontal lobe goes up. So we did a study where we had EEGs on it, and then we used infrared light on the forearm, 1064 nanometer on the forearm. Guess what happened to the EEG, the infrared, the alpha wave activity went up while we were treating the forearm.
Right, the forearm.
Okay, so indirect photobiomodulation. So that's what these devices are doing. They're not penetrating the scalp and the skull to reach the brain. They're turning something on in the skin.
Got
We
it.
don't know what that thing is. We don't know what that chemical is. It's got to be a chemical, but we don't know. And this it actually has very powerful implications. So, like take Parkinson's for example. Parkinson's is a disease in which the neurons that contain dopamine in the brain die off. And a doc down in Australia did a really cool study. He treated the back of a mouse with infrared light and then injected it with a neurotoxin that kills these dopamine neurons. Well, the animals that got treated on the back with infrared light, the neurons didn't die.
Wow. Wow.
So indirect photobiomodulation works.
Right.
We just don't understand it.
Yeah.
The frustrating thing about these helmets and stuff is that you do get a clinical benefit as long as you keep doing it.
Okay. So there are benefits, the indirect, all the things you just said. What is the recommendation you have to get the best shift when it comes to healing depression, PTSD? I'm assuming it helps with PTSD too.
Famously.
Mm-hmm.
What we recommend, based on our research of what it takes to get through the scalp and skull, is multi-watt infrared light. And we have a device that was specifically made to our criteria. And it uses 3 wavelengths, so it's maximizing neuroplasticity plus sort of the cognitive benefits of that 1064 I mentioned. And that direct treatment provides lasting results. We have folks 8-10 years out who are still doing well, unlike what we're seeing with these caps and these little LEDs.
Sure. All right, here's a personal question. Are you doing this on a regular basis? Because what I'm hearing is with the mouse on the back and then the neurotoxins, that it was preventive. Do you do these treatments on yourself?
Periodically, yeah. So so I'm not on a fixed regimen. I'll tell you, when I had COVID, I treated my lungs, and it cleared it up very quickly.
Yeah.
We're treating post-COVID fatigue, long COVID, the cognitive stuff, and that works famously. One of the interesting things, photobiomodulation field, we have grand rounds at Harvard every month. And we're talking about all these sorts of things. And the idea of what you just raised, this longevity piece, it's just now being considered. It's just now being...
It's what I'm geeking out on right now. I've been listening to Dave Asprey and the Huberman podcast and all the cutting edge of biohacking and how to, get those telomeres longer and, in the mitochondria. And there's so much. And that kind of leads to my next question, which is, where does one start? There's a part of me that's like, all right, Ted, I'm coming out to Colorado. Let's do ketamine on Monday, infrared on Tuesday, So for the person that's kind of going, yeah, I've got some issues. I've got some PTSD, some old traumas. I mean, even with women that have had chronic stress for a large part of their life, or even just now, or some really big things that have happened in their past relationships. So I want to come back to that PTSD thing. So where does one start, and can these treatments actually help the women that are listening that might be holding on to a bag of old beliefs and old memories and old traumas from past relationships? Where would you suggest someone start? And is it worth it for this woman that might be still stuck in old patterns and pain from the past?
Great question. And now we're at the intermix between neurobiology and psychology and mindfulness and
Welcome to my world.
One of the things that has been striking to me in the folks I've treated who have PTSD, one is a veteran who literally 48 years of PTSD, of every time a jet flew over, he was in the basement crying. 6 treatments, gone. Just done. And, I talked to him last week. It's been 6 years since it happened. He's doing fine. And the other classic example, I think, is a woman who's going through a divorce from a horrendous relationship. And, there's more than enough of that going around, but Colorado seems to have cornered the market lately for some reason.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah, we won't go down that rabbit
Yeah,
hole.
that's another podcast for another day.
And this woman was just paralyzed. She couldn't even look at the questionnaires on the child custody evaluation without just crawling into bed and hiding there for 2 days. And she went into court and advocated for herself and advocated for her kids. She was so strong by the time she got done with treatment. It was very so what, what's the criteria to say, okay, yeah, you should try this? It's, again, depression's such a broad thing. And so, part of the definition of depression or any psychiatric ailment is that it impacts your life.
Yeah.
If what's going on for you is impacting your life negatively, then you should seek treatment. And what we're talking about here is a non-pharmacological treatment.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that too, because the next question I had for you is there any downside or concern? So for someone who's like, it's like, yeah, this could be really interesting. Maybe it'll take me up a notch 2 or 3 of my follow through, happiness, all the stuff that sometimes I bump up against. Is there any downside? Are there side effects? Or is it just it may not do anything?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to add one more wrinkle to this, because it's technically light emitted from a diode. So it's technically coherent light, i.e. it's a laser.
I was actually talking about the ketamine, but you can talk
ketamine?
about both. Go talk about both.
I'll finish the laser piece first. So,
Yeah.
The idea of let's point a laser at my brain, conjures
That could be a little concerning.
Yeah. But, so for our patients, the most common side effect is nothing. The second most common side effect is a headache after like the first treatment.
Mm-hmm.
But that's only like 10% of our patients. Most people, they find it relaxing and enjoyable. But certainly, I have patients who like say, gosh, we're really talking about like pointing a laser at my brain here, doc. So I get it. I get the concern,
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, I treated my daughters and my granddaughter. So, I put my money where my mouth is.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the ketamine side, so ketamine is pharmacology. It is a medication.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there are potentially side effects. And most of them are dose dependent. So, ketamine has this, it's a street drug. So, but the dosing for street drugs is like 50 times the dosing we use for depression. And this is something most people probably don't know, but ketamine is the most common anesthetic used in children's hospitals because it's so darn safe. And those doses are like 10 times to 20 times what we're using for depression. But the doses we use for depression, the most common side effect is dizziness. It will make you woozy. You can't just jump out of the chair after the infusion and go walking off. It's like you're like at a, out in the sea, So that lasts about 15, 20 minutes and then it clears up.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to give people Zofran so they don't have any nausea along with that. At higher doses, that a lot of clinics are sort of pushing the dose, people will hallucinate. They'll, I don't know, see something that they're not quite sure, maybe a shadow or something. In 10 years, I've had one person hallucinate in my clinic in 10 years because we just don't push the dose. You don't need to push the dose to get the benefit.
No, that's great.
So
we mentioned you have a new book. Tell us about your book.
All right, thank you. So it's Brighter Days Ahead, and it's a book about thinking about depression. It talks a lot of the things that we've talked about today about the idea that depression isn't about serotonin. Depression is about neurodegenerative changes and how ketamine can very powerfully reverse that neurodegeneration. And it's as one of my friends said, it's a Chinese menu book. So there are chapters that won't apply to you. You don't need, if you're not thinking about ketamine, you don't need to read all the questions and answers that frequently ask questions. But in the back of the book, there are scientific deep dives where I really geek out. But for most of the book, it's like, okay, we're just going to touch on the top levels of this. If you get curious, go back and read the deep dive in the back, So in that way, I think it's a book that can appeal to a lot of different people. To, just the person who's sort of curious about this, to someone who's really thinking about ketamine, to someone who's really thinking about their loved one who's struggling with depression, to professionals.
Great. Great. That's on your website for people to find?
It is. It's on the website, and it'll be out in Amazon mid-May.
Okay, great. So we'll definitely have that in the show notes. And usually, almost always, my guests offer a special gift, and typically it's a quiz or a guidebook. I got to tell you, your gift is one of the more juicy, exciting gifts I've heard in a while. Would you care to share what you're offering to this person listening?
Absolutely. So what we're offering is that for anyone who wants to come and do a package of infrared light treatment, the first one's on me. And, if you're in Connecticut, Denver's a plane ride away. And I have patients who come from, we've got a couple here from Connecticut right now, Florida, Delaware, Texas, Oregon, California, you name it, they've come here to Denver, they've gotten treated. And we'll help you get set up, and we tell you all the good restaurants, all the good places to go.
And there's some pretty darn nice places to go. I lived in Colorado for almost 4 years in my 20s. I still miss it. I did my shadow work training and a bunch of other things in Colorado. Colorado friggin' rocks. So if you're looking for a vacation and a lovely light treatment, I think this is just an amazing opportunity to experience this. So beautiful. You did mention package. How many sessions do you recommend for someone to have a shift when it comes to the light therapy? What do you usually start with?
Everyone's an individual. So, what the right number for you is, I don't know. But what we do is we do some testing of the baseline so that we have some understanding of your brain function using QEEGs and pupil reflex tests and paper and pencil thing. Then we do treatments, and then we repeat. And then we look at that, that progression. And maybe we do, we have a football player that a former Bronco player, I'll let him remain nameless for now, but he's working on 30 plus treatments now. And he's just seen an amazing improvement, and he'll be talking about what we're doing himself pretty soon.
Nice.
But it depends on the person. So this veteran, he had 6 treatments and his PTSD was gone.
I just love it. This has been so inspirational. It certainly gives me hope for myself with certain things, as well as it's exciting, it's groundbreaking, and it just reminds me that there is always new, amazing things out there and people like yourself that are going, this isn't acceptable. Let's figure this out. So I really, deep bow to you, Ted, for the work that you're doing and your passion around helping people that are suffering and maybe not knowing why, and letting them know that there are some things that can help them. So thank you for your work, and thank you for your time, because I know you're a busy dude.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show.
You're so welcome. All right, sister, that was a lot to take in. The link to his website and his book and all that information and how to get in contact with him will be in the show notes. And I'm just so glad to have had this opportunity to share this segment, because this is huge. If we're not feeling good about ourselves and we don't know what else is at play here, it's like, as I always say, it's like swimming up a waterfall. It's like we want to be able to have whatever information we can to make the best of our life. And so this is a piece. This is a huge piece. Our brain health and what we can do about it. And so may this be the beginning of you geeking out on what's possible for you. So again, Ted, thank you so much for your time. And sister, have an amazing rest of your day. Go to his website. And until we meet again, mwah.